Hello, family. Welcome. This is Dr. Kia Pruitt. It is Election Day, November the 8th, 2022. And today we have a special guest, a reoccurring guest, and that is Andy Schectman from Miles Franklin. And as you all recall, Andy has been in business for over 30 years. He has maintained an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and never had one single complaint. He is approaching $8 billion in sales, and it's our great pleasure to have him to come today to talk to us about whatever is going on in the world of precious metals. So having said that, thank you so much for being here, Andy. I yield the floor to you for our biweekly updates.
Wonderful to see you, Kia. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So you had asked me offline about my feelings on all of the central bank purchases. I've been talking a lot about the central bank purchases for, well, really, geez, since 2019.
Wow.
In fact, we can go back and we've talked about in 2017, the banks were net sellers of gold. And in 2017, we first saw a drive by many of the European central banks, in particular, the German Bundesbank started the repatriation frenzy of repatriating their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed, followed by the Bank of Austria, the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Hungary, the Bank of Poland, the Bank of Turkey. All of these countries said the same thing: give us back our gold. We want it. And it had been held by the Bank of England and the New York Fed for many, many years for many, many reasons. But that begun not only the repatriation, but the accumulation in 2018, 2019, 2020. But what we found in 2019, which allowed these central banks, I believe they were clued in, they front ran. The Bank of International Settlements reclassified gold as the world's only tier one asset next to US dollars, the only other tier one asset. It's as good as cash, in other words. So the central banks have been the main accumulators of gold for quite some time. Now, what you're talking about is a little bit different. You're talking about the article probably that was in Bloomberg or in Reuters the other day that talked about central banks bought a record 399 tons of gold worth around $20 billion in the third quarter of 2022. That was about 350% higher than Q3 2021 and almost double the previous record of 241 tons in 2018 in quarter three. It also marks the 8th consecutive quarter of net purchases and lifts the year-to-date total to 673 tons by the world central banks. That is higher than any full year since 1967. So we're not even done with the year yet. You still have a couple months left, and we're already higher than any full year since 1967. What I found very interesting about that article is what really wasn't said. And Bloomberg talked about there being the buyers of all this gold being mystery whales. Yes. And they postulated, right, that the mystery buyers were either China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, or India. Now, wait a second. Where have we heard that before? Oh, yeah. When we first talked, what did we talk about? The BRICS nations. Yes. Brazil, Russia, China, India. Didn't we say that Saudi Arabia has already last week, 2 weeks ago, they submitted that they are joining BRICS. That was announced by the Royal Crown Prince and by the president of South Africa. They are joining BRICS. So these countries, all of these BRICS countries, that this newly strengthening BRICS alliance, the same ones that, what did they say a couple weeks ago? Oh yeah, we are going to develop a global reserve currency to challenge the dollar backed by commodities. What is gold? The only other tier one reserve asset. Oh yeah. So it becomes very interesting when you see what's happening. But there was an article that I read after the fact. I'm glad you asked me this question because then bet you didn't think I'd be this prepared to answer it. The guy's name, well, and it's important because the guy's name is Ronan Manley, and he wrote a really interesting article about this. And we call him Ronan the Destroyer, some of my buddies who are in this industry, because he is an amazing how can I put it? He is an investigative journalist, basically, on the gold side of things. And what he talks about is really quite interesting. And he says that the World Gold Council, who came out and told us that 399 tons were purchased,
Yes.
said that 119 of those 399 tons were reported purchases. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean about the other 280 tons? Absolutely. If 119 were reported of 399, well, what are the other 280? Oh, they're unreported purchases. Well, what the hell does that mean? Now, the article goes on to say that the reported 400-ton purchase is a combination of steady reported purchases by several central banks like Turkey. Mm-hmm. And I've been saying for weeks now that Turkey has bought more gold for the first half of 2022 than any country on the planet. They also said they're joining BRICS. BRICS is the country or the group of countries that is going to issue the world reserve currency pegged to commodities. Very, very interesting. But the point of it is that the unreported buying, they say, is not uncommon. It's not all official institutions publicly report their sales. The example that I would give would be China or Saudi Arabia. China hasn't updated their gold holdings for a long time. They do very, very rarely, but they are the biggest importers and producers of gold in the world. Saudi Arabia, who has been gobbling up gold, hasn't updated their official holdings since 2010. Or more ominously, perhaps these mystery whales, whoever they are, know something that the Western nations prefer not to consider about the New World Order. I think that what we are seeing is very disconcerting. Now, one of the things that I've talked about, Kia, that I haven't really talked to you about is in 2020, 2021, 2022, this group of reportables on the Commitment of Traders report. What is that? That probably means a whole lot of nothing to your listeners. The Commitment of Traders report is a report published by the COMEX, which is the US commodity exchange, where all the prices globally are set. And they report the positioning of the largest traders in the world, or on the exchange rather. And normally they have just two groups of reportables: the commercials, which would be JP, Citi, Goldman, et cetera, Bank of America, and the specs, which are the hedge funds. And they battle against one another. If the commercials go long, the specs or hedge funds go short, and vice versa. And for most of my career, no one ever took possession of metal off the COMEX. Never. Or the London Metals Exchange. They were platforms to use for trading. Very rarely would anyone take delivery, maybe 1%. Well, that's not happening right now. And in 2020, I talked about the rise of this group called the Others, who we don't know who they are. They are believed to be sovereign wealth funds and family offices. That's who they're thought to be. Are they the ones that are taking all of this metal? Is it the most influential, well-funded, well-informed private traders? Because let me explain something to you. When we talk about supply, at the very top level of supply is the London Metals Exchange and the COMEX. This is where all the bars are stored, right? The LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association, their silver vault levels are contracting at the sharpest level in history. In fact, the total amount of silver in the LBMA vaults right now, Kia, is down to 300 million ounces. Well, in September, or in August, India took possession of 46 million ounces. And in July, the withdrawals on the LBMA vault was 46,500,000 ounces. If it continues like this, you're talking mid-2023, all the deliverable silver would be depleted off the London Metals Exchange. And how about the COMEX, where the registered stockpile of silver right now is the lowest that it's ever been since they started keeping inventories? It's fallen by 70% in the last 18 months, meaning someone is draining the COMEX and the LBMA of gold and of silver. And in terms of silver, there's only enough silver backing the registered category to settle about 7,100 COMEX silver contracts. We're this close to the whole system really breaking apart. And so when you talk about who's buying all this gold and silver, well, it ain't the US. And it's either all of these countries that are rallying against the U.S. in the BRICS nations, or it is the very, very, very smart, well-funded, well-informed private traders who not only are purchasing it, but more relevant, they are withdrawing it from the ecosystem. Well, why would you do that? because you're scared that the ecosystem is polluted. It's like being in a fishbowl and you drop 4 drops of poison into it. Fish are going to try to get out as fast as they can. The ones that don't get out are going to die. And that's kind of the analogy that I would make here. The smart fish who can jump out of the bowl, well, they're jumping, and they're jumping with as much of the clean water or the bars as they can take before the whole system becomes contaminated. It's very, very, very strikingly obvious it's something unusual in terms of accumulation and delivery and removal of counterparty risk is happening, where you see drawdowns on the epicenters of supply, both the London Metals Exchange and the COMEX, falling off a cliff at the fastest level it's ever been and to the lowest levels they've ever been, where you're just a few months away from blowing up the entire supply of everything. And that's not just the supply, it's the supply that backs the ability to set the price globally. So, you know, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We're there. These are interesting. These are not dull and complacent. And that's just one piece of it for sure.
Thank you for defining that and letting us know about what's going on, because I wondered about those whales and those mystery whales. And I wondered if those were any of the countries that were a part of BRICS, especially when I read an article recently that said that the Russian ruble is the world's best performing currency. Have you seen that?
I have. Yep, I have. And that's because our sanctions did a whole lot of no good on Russia. Those sanctions, you know, 80% of the world is still trading with Russia. And what Russia did was to say to all of these countries, we'll sell you our oil and our coal and our natural gas and our fertilizer and our wheat and all of these things, and we'll give it to you at a killer deal, but you got to pay in rubles. We're not going to take dollars anymore. So what did that mean? That means all of these countries that are stockpiled with dollars, because dollars were forever, since 1974, the currency that everyone settled in to buy almost every commodity, and for sure energy. Now they're selling their dollars or whatever their local currencies are to buy rubles, which pushes the value up. And they're buying rubles because they're buying Russia's energy and their commodities at a subsidized rate, but doing it in rubles, which is, I mean, you couldn't talk about a more savvy chess player than Vladimir Putin. And he really showed that these sanctions haven't done a whole lot of good. In fact, what the sanctions have done has spurred on innovation, which I'm going to talk about here, because I think it's important. And that innovation is something called the M Bridge, as in Mary, M Bridge. And it's a platform that was designed by Hong Kong. It's the Hong Kong Authority, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Bank of Thailand, the Digital Currency Institute of the People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates, and a few other of these countries that, again, are all part of the BRICS nations that built this platform called mBridge. And the mBridge is a ledger that was built by central banks to support real-time peer-to-peer cross-border payments and foreign exchange transactions using central bank digital currencies. Keep in mind, the Bank of International Settlements, which also told us gold is the only other tier 1 reserve asset in the world, told us that it is mandatory that all central banks have CBDCs, a central bank digital currency, by 2025. So what does that mean? Well, let's keep in mind what happened once the US weaponized the dollar and told Russia, you're out of SWIFT. That's it. You're out of SWIFT. You can't transact anything anymore. And we sanctioned them, kicked them out of SWIFT, and froze their assets. That freaked out the rest of the world. And here's what they've done to it. Last month, China successfully completed a 40-day trial using its digital currency, which is the digital yuan, which I've talked a lot about. They've been using it for 4 years to build the Belt Road Initiative. They used it at the Winter Olympics. And they're going to use it, I believe, to be the rails of the new BRICS currency. They've shown, call it a long beta test, that it works. Well, last month, they did a 40-day trial settling cross-border transactions between Hong Kong, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. And the trial processed 160 payments over $22 million, all in real time, like that. Bang, done, boom, done, boom, done. Not send a wire and you get it tomorrow. You ever try to get a wire from across the globe and it goes through all these intermediate banks? It's going to take a day, maybe 2. And it's a major pain in the butt. And you got to go into the bank, you got to do all that stuff. What is not really being reported is that all of these transactions sidestep SWIFT. In
Mm,
fact, those transactions all came through the MCBDC bridge,
okay.
which is part of the digital yuan test, which simulates direct transactions between China and its partners without dollar-denominated correspondent banking. So you're sidestepping the SWIFT system.
Yes.
This is a huge deal because
Mhm.
what do our sanctions mean if you don't have to use it? Now, how are the countries like Russia and Iran escaping sanctions? Well, I'll give you one example. Before this, they would sell their oil, let's say Russia, or let's say Iran. They'd sell their oil to China for the Chinese petro yuan bond, which has been going on for a few years now. That bond is denominated in yuan, but it's immediately convertible and only used to buy oil, immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So they sell their oil to China for a bond denominated in yuan instead of dollars, and they convert it into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, take possession of the gold, and don't report it to the world. So all these countries that are going to join the BRICS, like Saudi Arabia, like Iran, they're all going to join BRICS. They've all already said they plan on doing it, and they are accumulating gold outside the purview of, and they are sidestepping sanctions. The sanctions mean nothing. You get rid of SWIFT, you find an alternative to SWIFT like the M bridge, it's game over for the West and their ability to do anything in terms of sanctions without lobbing bombs. And so this is a big deal, so much so that after the successful test, Russia just announced that it would also begin tests using the digital ruble and yuan to settle transactions with China. And my question to you, Kia, or more appropriately to the whole world, because I've been talking a lot about this for the last 2 years, is this the beginning of the new commodity-backed reserve currency that BRICS countries have just pledged to launch this year? They just announced it. They're going to launch it this year. Is this the beginning of it? And I would say that it is. And what it really is a platform that will reduce costs, expedite cross-border transactions, but most importantly, undercut the dollar and its correspondent banks for the SWIFT system. This is a massive, massive, massive deal. And I think just is more part and parcel with why you're seeing these huge countries, these whales who are mysterious, why they don't want the world to know who's accumulating it all, and why you're seeing such huge accumulations of it, double the biggest accumulation we've ever seen in a whole year, and yet we still have 7 weeks left in this year. Yeah. It's disconcerting.
Speaking of undercutting the USD, I read an article about Iraq, and what the article stated was the new premier he said that he was going to revalue the Iraqi dinar against the USD. And I thought that was a huge announcement because, it's like everybody is moving away from the United States dollar. Had you heard?
It's a very big announcement for a lot of people because there are a lot of investors out there who loaded up on Iraqi dinar. Lots of them. Yeah. And if it really does get revalued, it can make a lot of people very wealthy if it really does happen. Revaluation that is made in that manner is one thing. Revaluation that is accepted by the world is another. Oh. So I don't know how it all plays out, but I think the constant in that statement is the world is moving away from the dollar, from the Western hegemony, from the perceived hypocrisy of the West. And I think that this is something that you're going to continue to see, Kia, more and more and more and more as the rest of the world is tired of, like, for example, weaponizing the dollar and what we've done to Russia, whether or not you want, let's take the war out of the equation. Okay. And the aggression out of the equation, whether or not you believe that it's justified to do what we did. The fact of the matter is, when you are the steward of the world's reserve currency, it's not your job to say who can and can't use it. It's for world opinion. And once you cross that Rubicon of weaponizing it and saying you can use it, but Kia, you can't, but Mike, you can, and Julie, you can, but Frank, you can't. You have a problem. And all of the can'ts, they're going to coalesce and find a way to sidestep and come together against that tyranny. I mean, and if you lived in one of those countries, you would feel that way. So it's a big deal. It truly, truly is. And I think it's only the very beginning of more and more de-dollarization this is why it's so important to do what the biggest money in the world is doing, not buy gold to get wealthy or silver, but buy it because it is wealth.
Mm.
And it is wealth that has outlived 2 world wars and German
Mm.
hyperinflation and the Great Depression and the Civil War and still remains immutable to this day. I think that's kind of the theme here.
Yeah. Yeah, you brought up the weaponization of the United States dollar. And it's interesting the way the United States has been bullied in so many ways. If you don't do what we say do, they'll put sanctions on you. And
Right.
yeah, that made me think about Zimbabwe, not just Russia, but Zimbabwe had sanctions placed upon them. And then they just said, all right, that's okay. We'll mint gold coins. And they did so earlier this year. I think it was about this summer. Yeah, nobody's afraid of the United States anymore like they used to be. They'll just turn to gold.
Well, and it is a new era, I think.
Yeah.
You're right. And I think we often take the dollar's reserve status for granted simply because we've grown up under
Yeah.
this system. But the truth of the matter is reserve currencies come and go every 100 years or so. I often will show a chart going back to the 1400s where
Wow.
you have, currencies that have been the world reserve currency until they're not any longer. And the dollar was the choice when the world moved to the fiat system because of Bretton Woods. And in 1942, when 44 rather, when the Allies met in Bretton Woods and anointed the dollar the world reserve, and the dollar was backed by gold and all of this, dollars flooded the globe. So there were dollars everywhere. And when we decided, after 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, now we're a fiat currency system. No country could even attempt to match the might of the U.S. economy and all the dollars that were circulating around the globe. But look at where we are now. Look at what China has done and how they have risen from a third world country to a superpower. And some would argue their economy is actually stronger than the U.S. economy right now, and they export more, and they're involved in the GDPs of so many countries because they are the engine of production, which we used to be. We're not any longer. And so when you put all of these countries together, China, Russia, India, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and the list goes on and on and on. They're all joining the BRICS nations, and all of the countries on the Belt Road. You have a group that in and of themselves is much stronger as a combination or as a force, a coalesced group.
Yeah.
They're much stronger. Now, it's the rallying cry of this type of bullying and hypocrisy that has brought everyone to the table. It will be the pegging on a new digital distributed ledger technology, the new digital yuan, which I believe will be the rails of the new BRICS currency. They've come out and told us they're going to issue it this year or very soon. It's going to be the pegging of real commodities and the ability to the immutability and the veracity of it denoted on a ledger that you can see without having to take someone's word for it. That will be the glue that holds it all together. It's a scary thing. And I think the moral of the story is that we are getting close to the end of our run as the world reserve currency, or at least as the singular world reserve currency. And last week, you had China come out and pretty much put a nail in that coffin when they came out and basically made a commitment, Saudi Arabia did rather, to China, and said that China is our main priority for oil sales now and for the next 50 years. And that the US really, we only look at them for protection. Well, you got these brain dead senators who are talking about removing the Patriot missiles from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates because why? Because they wouldn't increase oil production into the midterm. So that's an open act of aggression, these fools say. And they want to enact something called NOPEC, which is a bill, NOPEC, which would strip the antitrust exemption of OPEC and would allow us to prosecute. And we are incentivizing the demise of the dollar as the world reserve currency. We are incentivizing it. And by Saudi Arabia not only saying we're joining BRICS, but say China is our biggest trading partner for oil for the next 50 years. We have been for the last 50 years. Now
Wow.
it's China. And it is the protection of the Saudi kingdom and the denomination of oil globally through OPEC that has given us the petro status. That's now going bye-bye. And if people don't see that, and all of these things that are spinning away from the dollar in an effort to build this new ecosystem, and when the switch flips and the cloth is pulled off over the eyes of the American public, and they see, my God, what has just happened? Why have I not been paying attention?
Yes.
Why have I not heard any of this? It's too late. And you can see that by the drawdown of all the supplies of metal from the world's exchanges. If gold and silver, which have not performed the way people think they should in terms of pricing, if that pricing was indicative of value or demand, then who the hell is buying all of the gold and silver? And it's disappearing. Where in one day, 25 million ounces, 45% of all the kilo bars held on the COMEX, the price setting mechanism in the world, disappear, delivered off the exchange. Where in one day, 5% of all the 100-ounce bars gone off the exchange. Who's taking them? Where are they going? Who's got this kind of money? Where in the last in the last several months, 76 months, 70% of all the registered silver on the COMEX has been delivered off the exchanges. Who's taking it all? And so they are the big money who sees what's coming. Clearly, I think they're using the suppression by the commercial banks and the managed money of the price of gold and silver as a tool of misdirection to reposition out of dollars into these assets without creating attention. It's the no look pass in basketball. They are misdirecting through price and rhetoric, and the biggest money in the world is using that as cover to de-dollarize and to reposition into what is coming next. That next chapter is coming, and when the page flips, it's too late if you don't realize it. But when you see Bloomberg and Reuters talk about this, yeah, they're gold whales, and who could they be? But when they name the BRICS nations, and BRICS just said we're going to issue a new gold-backed or a new commodity-backed currency, and you got the new M-Bridge, which is successfully showing that you can trade digital currencies and not use the SWIFT system. If you don't see how these are all interconnected, oh yeah, gold's the only other tier one reserve asset in the world. Maybe that's why they're buying it all. These things are starting to come together, which used to just be pieces that I was grabbing out of the air and trying to put them together. You can see that it's happening. It really is. So I don't think we're far away from that aha moment. And I don't think it'll be a pleasant one. Honestly, I think there's going to be some scary stuff. And to top off the scary Sunday, price of gold and silver before I got on this with you spiked. I'm going to look at my phone and shut my phone off, which is something I normally do. Let me just see what they're doing here right now. Hang on. So right now we have gold up $38 and silver up 56 cents. That's a big move. It's about 3% in both cases. And I tried to find what was going on. Why? I didn't see anything, but I did see one thing, and it's interesting. This article appeared roughly 5-10 minutes, 15 minutes before the rally. And it was written by Bloomberg, and it says that President Xi just ordered China to prepare for war, and warns that the world order is on a brink of collapse. Xi Jinping has ordered China to prepare for war as he warns his nation's security is increasingly unstable. In a chilling escalation, the Chinese dictator declared that Beijing will comprehensively strengthen its military training in preparation for any war. They've been talking about going after Taiwan. That rhetoric is increasing. And, they fired hypersonic missiles as they were doing testing. I think this is their way of saying to the US, don't even think about it. These are missiles that cannot be knocked down. We do not have the technology. And maybe that's why they've sold bonds, almost 150 billion worth over the last 8 months, every single month. They're divesting of dollars. They're divesting of treasuries. And they are preparing, I think, for some unpleasant events. And you have our president who said, we will defend Taiwan. I mean, are we actually talking about going to war with Russia, kind of by proxy with what's going on in the Ukraine and with China? Are we that stupid And here you have China and Russia who have coalesced together in many ways. We are poking sticks at some very, very powerful countries when instead we should just mind our own damn business, bring all of the troops home, protect our borders, build our infrastructure, and stop worrying what the rest of the world is doing, because we have really aggravated and pissed off the majority of the world. And you can see it beginning to escalate. And it's scary. Yeah, it's time for people to realize you're not buying gold and silver to get rich or get wealthy. It is wealth. And it's time for people to wake up and do something about it. Because if you have all of your assets and wealth in dollars, you are destined to go broke. If you are not a contrarian, you are destined to go broke. I do believe that. And we are getting rapidly to that point where we're going to wake up on a Monday morning to a new reality. It's going to happen over a weekend. It's going to happen on a Sunday night. OPEC says we're now taking other currencies, and bang, it's over. And that's how fast it happens. But I think we're rapidly approaching that moment.
Yes, and I'm concerned too that by the time the people wake up, it's going to be too late. And having said that, I believe I heard you say something not too long ago that wholesalers were having difficulties finding product, and you hadn't seen anything like that since 2008, where it took 3 months to have product delivered.
That's right.
See that becoming an issue, even on a broader scale in the future?
In 2008, there was a clear beginning and a clear end. It was defined. We didn't see the drawdown of the London Metals Exchange and the COMEX the way we are right now. And while that was equally frightening, this has been a methodical bleed down of all of the world's supply from the top on down. I think it's different this time. 2008 was a big deal, but what it was a credit problem where we had a massive credit contraction and we had problems with the banking system. It was different. What we're experiencing right now, to me, is it's the end of an era. It's the end of the Keynesian cycle. It's the end of the dollar as being the central world reserve currency and what that really implies. And to make it worse, you've had 3 years of record money creation and low interest rates that have created distortions in asset prices. And as rates rise, and you'll see an evisceration of people's portfolios in stocks, bonds, and real estate. All three are inversely correlated to a rise in rates, all three coming from all-time highs. And so people haven't woken up yet, but there is no motivational force greater in the world than fear. And if we wake up and see some major event, like we've talked about, that like just snaps 40% of the S&P like that, kind of like what we saw in March of 2020, although it came right back, maybe this time it doesn't. And maybe that's why you're seeing record insider selling. But if we see something like that and people wake up and start to look to acquire precious metals, look, it's really hard to get it right now when the estimate is 0.5% allocation across the entire US financial matrix to precious metals. And it's that hard to get now. What happens when that's 5%? Just a lowly 5% is a tenfold increase in demand. It'll all be gone. All of the major refiners are out of product or struggling to get it, and you're into January and February before you're getting it. Same with all of the government sovereign mints. They're all back ordered. They're all at all-time high premiums. They're all 6, 8, 12 weeks back ordered. But more distressing, the exchanges from where all of the metal comes from, the London Metals Exchange and the COMEX, are being bled dry. It's all disappearing at a pace that no one's ever seen. So if it starts from the top, then progresses to the wholesale and to the sovereign mints of the world and the refineries, and then to the retail market, where do we go? Where do we turn? And when you talk about what makes a gold bull market different from any other, is that no one wants to sell at a profit to go back into dollars. So they'll hold tight, and the higher the price goes, only increases their motivation for holding it to begin with. And so I think that this is a situation where it's only going to get worse until it gets better. And it may not get better, but I see it only getting worse. And it concerns me greatly because it used to be getting clients was 100 times harder than getting product. It's the other way around right now.
Wow. Wow. So it's harder to get product. Um, since the United States dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1900, I've heard that gold has increased in its value. So that made me wonder if everything that's tied, since the United States dollar's, declining in value, does that mean that everything that's tied to the dollar will also decline? For example, will the stock market crash since it's tied to the US dollar? Should we expect something like that to happen in our reality?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Or maybe it goes way up in dollar terms. Let's look at it a different way.
Okay.
Recently, in the United Kingdom, like within the last month, gold hit its all-time high
Mhm.
in British pounds. Why? Because the dollar is so strong. So it's distorting the value. Where most of the world is paying all-time highs for gold, the US is still a few $100s away because the dollar measured against a basket of crappy currencies is at all-time highs, distorting the value. And so it's important to you have to kind of think arbitrarily. Let's look at gold as sitting on the ledge of a bathtub, and the water underneath it is the dollar, and you can see its value relative to the dollar. But if you pull the plug on the dollar and the dollar starts to drop, is it gold that got more expensive, or is it the dollar that we measured against just collapsed? So
Wow.
yeah, you might see the stock market go to the moon in dollar terms, but what does that mean in a currency that has a massively declining global value? So it's difficult in the United States because we grew up always using dollars to measure value. If you grew up in Europe before the euro, what is the distance of between Minnesota and Wisconsin? A couple 100 miles from the capital to capital is another country with a different currency. So as you drove through Europe, you understood exchange rates, you understood valuations in different currencies. We have become very dollar centric, where we think everything is valued in dollars. And as the world reserve currency, it has been. But if the dollar all of a sudden loses all its value, is it gold and silver or stock prices that got higher, or is it the dollar that we measure it against got much lower? And I think that's really the issue here, is that, in dollars, and that's what's different this time. It's not the markets that I am as concerned about, although that's a big piece of it. What I really think is the coup de grace to all of this is what is going to happen to the dollar. And so, all of this wealth is measured in dollar terms. All of these dollar values have been really blown to sky high valuations that are awarded based upon copious amounts of money being injected into the system while keeping interest rates low. That stimulated malinvestment, where corporations would build out their infrastructure and hire more people because the cost of money was nothing, based upon assumption that stays that way forever, where you can buy a house for twice what you can afford because interest rates were at 3% on a 30-year mortgage. Well, now they're 7.5%. That means price of money just went up by 100+%. So you can't buy as much. Well, what if you're on a variable rate mortgage, and when it resets, you have to now reset to a higher level? It's called an ARM. Well, now you're paying 7.5% on a fixed rate. You're dead in the water. You can't even make your payment. You're insolvent. And this is a problem. This is a real problem because of all the distortions that have happened through manipulation of interest rates and too much money creation without a tether to like a gold standard. It's created distortions, misallocations. It's what the Austrian economists would call the crack up boom, where you have massive expansion in credit, followed by manipulation of interest rates and easy money that creates distortions in assets and in prices and in price discovery. And when it corrects, when that credit is pulled away and you see a contraction in credit and you see things start to correct and it tries to find fair value or equilibrium with interest rates and value, there's going to be some real big religious experiences for a lot of people who think they're wealthy right now in dollar terms. And could be in for a very big surprise when not only the markets collapse in dollar terms, but the dollar collapses in terms or in relation to things like gold or other stable currencies.
Speaking of a religious experience, this is something that's kind of personal, Andy. I have studied history a little bit, and in my studies, and I'm Jewish, I'm Hebrew, so we've practiced the Hebrew tradition. And what I've noticed is that there has been a collapse, whether it has been an economic collapse or a stock market crash at the end of every 7-year cycle. And in the Hebrew tradition, we call that the Shemitah. So we saw that happen in 1929, with the stock market crashing, leading to the 1930s with the Great Depression. We saw it happen every 7 years at the end of every 7-year cycle. So, okay, I look back in history, then I said, let me look more recently, because maybe people can't relate to that. So I looked at what happened in 2000. There was a stock market collapse, and then we had 9/11, and so we had a decimation of the economy. 7 years later, after 2001, 2008, as you mentioned, there was some issues with the financial markets, and now here we are. No, then it was 2015, the exact same thing. Here we are 7 years later in 2022, and haven't studied history, haven't understood that the Shemitah is the end of a 7-year cycle. On the 7th year, something happens. Now, in our tradition, you're supposed to release people from debts. That's what Shemitah means, release or let go. But what I've seen in the American history is that there has been a stock market collapse. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really concerned, not just because of what we see playing out, but because what I've seen happen throughout history.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point. I know you had 1987, the market crash. I don't know what happened in 1993.
Okay.
That was we had just been in business for a few years. I don't know what happened in 93, but I'm sure there was something in 1993 that was a problem. But then you had 2000 and the .com, and as you mentioned, going forward from there, I think when you talk about the year of Jubilee and the Shemitah and all of these things, yeah, I mean, I read the book by Kahn, is his name, Jonathan Kahn, I think, and it's called the Harbinger, I think it's called. Scared the crap out of me. It's an amazing book. It's about this big, and it talks about just that. Very, very much worth everyone reading. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things, there's a lot more to the world than meets the eye. Just look at a pine cone and you'll see that pattern throughout all of nature. And there's a lot of patterns throughout nature that repeat,
Yes.
that are bigger than us all. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. And so, look, the bottom line is this, Kia, I am a big believer in owning precious metals, and I buy it every 2 weeks as a promise to my father that I made in 1989 when we started this company together, that would be the only rule, that I'd buy it every 2 weeks, something, even if it was just 1 ounce of silver, something every 2 weeks. That's my promise to him. And I've honored that promise. And for 33 years, I've never missed a 2-week period, not once, ever. And I have never bought it to get rich. I am very cognizant of its movement and of its value, and as its reflection of my net worth. But I buy it because it's wealth, and there's something that it's almost religious that gives me comfort, knowing that I am doing the right thing. You can go all the way back to biblical times, and gold and silver are spoken of in the Bible ad nauseum. And gold and silver are assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability in a world of counterparty risk, where we are heading with all of the systemic incestuous connections globally, financially. The removal of counterparty risk is something that I think has a lot. There's a lot to be said about it, and it's wealth that has outlived all of the world's problems. And I just think that it's never been more important. And I'm glad you bring up these events, because it's important to look at gold and silver for what they are. If you're buying it to get wealthy, then you're buying the wrong thing. If you're buying it because it is wealth, and if you own enough of it, you'll be wealthy, arguably. But you will be out of harm's way in one of these cycles that is bearing down upon us, whether it be the 100-year cycle or thereabouts of a world reserve currency, whether it be the ending of the cycle of the petrodollar, or the ending of the Shemitah cycle, the 7-year cycle, or whatever cycle it is. I just think that it's time that you need to get out of the way, because it's coming, and you can see it by the actions of all of the world's players. If this was a game of chess, it's very close to calling check. Not quite checkmate yet, but we're almost to the end of the game, and I think people need to realize that.
Yes. And in my conclusion, Andy, I always like to end on a positive note, because things could get a lot worse before they get better. You can see that even being Hebrew, I remember the children of Israel coming out of the land, coming out of slavery. Before they got to the promised land, they had to go through the wilderness, because that wilderness experience builds character, it prepares you, and it helps you to see how strong you are, helps you rely on your community. You know, it seems like a bad thing, but you can see the good in it if you have that type of mindset. But Andy, I mentioned that because I know things might get worse, but I'm considering that you said that Basel III made sure that all banks all banks had to become Basel III compliant, which means that gold was a tier 1 asset. I'm considering that. Secondly, I am considering what I read about Project Sandman, which was 100 plus nations agreeing to return to the gold standard. I'm considering how Alexander Mooney, the representative of West Virginia, I think you heard of him, introduced House Resolution 5404 to define the dollar as a fixed weight in gold in 2018. And then he came back about October the 6th or 7th of this year and introduced House Resolution 9157, defining the dollar as a fixed weight of gold. I think about all that. I think about how the Constitution defines the dollar as a fixed weight of silver and or gold. And I see all these countries moving away from the USD. Can we surmise, Andy, in your humble opinion, in your educated opinion, your professional opinion, at some point, can we hope that the United States will also return to gold? And at some point, maybe we all will return to the gold standard?
I think we will. The question is, do we have to have the whole system blow up first? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think the only way, it's like a game of Monopoly.
Okay.
You've been playing a game with your brothers and sisters for a long time using the Monopoly money. Now you decide that you're going to use gold coins, but the board is so screwed up because your brother owns everything from Park Place to Illinois Avenue. Because he was able to game the system with all of the fake Monopoly money. The only way to start is to throw the whole board up in the air and start again. And that's kind of where we're at right now. I think that, yes, we will ultimately go back to that system, but it's a larger question of, we are a country, the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, where we have a $31 trillion debt. That's before unfunded liabilities of Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and government and military pensions. Social Security is $55 trillion underfunded. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. As interest rates rise, those obligations become exponentially more severe. And just the interest on the national debt alone, when you're talking about, as they rise on 31 trillion, every 1% is $310 billion in interest payments, where pretty darn soon, we're almost there. All of the tax receipts that are used to run the country won't even cover just the interest on the debt, let alone the military and the roads and the bridges and the infrastructure and the entitlement payments and all of this nonsense, where we think it's wise to send $90 billion to the Ukraine instead of using that to build our infrastructure. So yeah, I think you could argue that maybe, and I don't mean to rain on the happiness parade where you like to bring some positivity. I respect that. You're a very positive person. And I think it's wonderful to talk to you, even by email, where, you start every email by saying joyous rising. I mean, it's just a wonderful way to be greeted. But I think the truth of the matter is that in order to start the game from scratch using real money, you gotta either pay off the debts or blow up the whole system and basically for lack of a better explanation, file bankruptcy and just say,
Absolutely.
sorry, game over, but we're going to start again. And this time we're going to do it right. Well, maybe that's what's on the plate. And maybe that's why we're seeing what appears to be by the stupidity of our leaders and their actions that just seem so counterintuitive. Maybe that's why we're seeing a controlled demolition and it all blows up. And then indeed we do move back to a gold standard and we do move back to sound money. Because I don't know that if just issuing sound money will fix what ills this country, and that is our indebtedness, most of which is accumulated at the lowest interest rates in human history. And as those rates rise, there is a day of reckoning ahead. And I don't think that the year of Jubilee, where you forgive everyone's debts, is going to fix this problem, because this is a lot bigger than that. And if it is, well, that means we've lost our world reserve status. We've lost our center of free trade. We've lost what makes America America. And there will be some years of difficulty getting back to that point where hard work, where belief in country and in God and patriotism and all of these things that we all grew up under, that seem to be fleeting right now, come back into focus. And I don't mean to get too far off track, but I think there's a lot to be said for that mentality versus where we are right now. We need to go through, I think, some lean years and some pain in order to get there. And I think maybe that's what this is all about. I hope I'm wrong, but it kind of feels that way to me.
Absolutely. I'm glad that we know each other, because you keep me balanced. I have a tendency to, be off the charts with excitement and happiness, but you have to have balance. You have to keep your mind focused. And it reminds me, what you said reminds me of a conversation I had with an Austrian economist. Is that correct? Is Kinsey an Austrian economist who said at the end of every empire, what happens is that they rack up the debt, they spend up all the money, they print a whole lot of money
That's the crack up boom. That's correct.
And then they crash the system, and everything explodes or implodes or whatever is destructive, and then they return to sound money. So
that's exactly right. This is exactly where we are in that story, where a massive expansion in credit and spending and distortions of valuations now are going to have to be dealt with. And that's where we're at. And as rates continue to rise, it will only expedite the process by which the bar tab needs to be paid. And we've been fat and drunk for a long time, and now it's time to pay the bar tab. And that's the unfortunate part of it. But maybe we'll learn from our past transgressions. Let's hope so. And for our children's sake, that they grow up in a world or raise their children in a world that's better than the world we find ourselves in today. Again, still the greatest country in the world, and I'm a big patriot, but we've kind of I don't know how to say it. We've kind of goofed this one up a little bit, and I don't know that there's a happy ending without a couple chapters of repenting and paying for the indebtedness that our predecessors have levied upon this country. There's just no way out of it.
If we want to get into precious metals, or even add to the stack that we have, Andy, what should we do? How do we contact you?
Yep, the same way until our new website is done. Send us an email at info@milesfranklin. Say Dr. Kia Pruitt referred me. We will make sure you get an updated price list, answer any questions, call you if you want to be called, put that down if you do.
Okay.
Don't forget a phone number. And we'll make it a very good experience. And we'll make sure that your listeners are getting as good of a price as they'll find anywhere, personalized service from a company that's never had a complaint. And we'll make damn sure that your listeners are not the first complaint that we've ever had.
Thank you, Andy. And you also do something on Tuesdays, is that correct? On Twitter?
Yep, on Tuesdays we issue a new special. This week's special would be silver maple leafs that are coming out, and I can send you a JPEG of that here later on today. Maybe you can post that as well. But these are silver maple leafs, and they're very expensive, as are all coins right now. They're $8.50 over the price of silver. But look around. You might find 1 out of 100 companies that are anywhere near that price, and we're trying to actually make it a special. That's just one of the things that we have, but they are silver maple leaves They're not 2022. They're backdate maple leaves, which mean nothing. They're just from 2020, 2019, whatever. They're in mint boxes. They're in sealed and solid tubes. $8.50 over should be the best price in the country. And just make sure they mention your name, and we will make sure it's a good experience from start to finish. You have my word on that.
Okay. Well, Andy, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you
You
for taking
too.
time. I appreciate it. You're a very busy man. So,
Oh gosh, it's pretty crazy. Well, never too busy to drop in, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, and we'll keep
okay.
doing this twice a month. And if there's something that needs us to get online and talk about it, right now, we can always do that too. But in the meantime, I hope you and all yours out there stay well, and
Thank you.
um, look forward to picking up where we left off real soon.
All right. Thank you, Andy and family. We appreciate you tuning in to us today. I hope you voted today because I am a patriot. I love America. This is the greatest country in the world. And I trust that with all the information we've given you, family, that we've given you something to raise your vibrations and inspire you to go out and create the most magnificent, most joyous, beautiful reality that you desire and deserve. Peace, family. Bye, Andy.
Bye, Kia.
Great
Thank you.
day.
Take care. You
You're
too.
welcome. Make it great,
Bye-bye.
family.